"I have to meet a client tonight," my husband said before leaving our penthouse. 2 hours later, I was sitting in an elegant restaurant with his mistress's former mother-in-law. She slid a folder across the table and whispered, "What's inside will make you leave him." At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened. My husband walked in with his mistress on his arm, both of them laughing until they saw us by the window. They thought being caught together was the worst part. They had no idea the real nightmare had only just begun. This story starts quietly but won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a comment. Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and justice? Which would you pick? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. Some details have been adapted for storytelling. The message, the heart of it, is what I hope stays with you. At 5:30 in the morning, before Manhattan's first breath, I was already at war with numbers that refused to balance. But the ledger I should have been watching was my marriage. The penthouse kitchen smelled like dark roast and bergamot from the Earl Grey I'd brewed for the travel mug I'd carry to the office later. Central Park stretched below the window, still dark except for scattered street lamps reflecting off the reservoir. I stood at the Marble Island with my laptop open, scanning reservation emails from 3 restaurants that bore my sweat and vision in every detail. Altitude, the flagship on West 42nd, showed 100% bookings for the next 2 weeks. The Provisions catering arm had locked in a Fortune 500 client for December 6-figure contract. Every metric pointed upward. Every number told the story of an empire built from a single food truck 13 years ago. I was 54 years old. Most guests who walked through Altitude's doors assumed I was the woman in the apron serving their plates, maybe the manager, if they were generous. They didn't know I owned the building. Didn't know I'd negotiated the lease, designed the menu, hired every sous chef, and personally taste-tested 800 iterations before settling on the signature duck confit that food critics called transcendent. I'd built an $18 million operation with these hands, one 16-hour shift at a time. I clicked through the morning prep checklists. Dominic had already confirmed receipt of the truffle shipment at Altitude. Marcus forwarded updated head counts for tonight's private dining events. I signed off on 3 catering menus, smoked salmon appetizers for a law firm, gala short rib entrees for a pharmaceutical board dinner, and a vegan tasting menu for a tech startup's product launch. Each approval was muscle memory. Now decisions made with the same ease I used to tie my shoes. The coffee tasted bitter on my tongue, slightly burnt from sitting too long in the French press. I added another splash of cream and returned to the spreadsheet tracking food costs across all locations. Produce prices had climbed 8% this quarter. I made a note to renegotiate with the Hunts Point supplier before the winter menu rollout. Footsteps on marble. Soft, deliberate, the practiced quiet of someone who'd learned this choreography through repetition. Warren Fletcher, 57 senior partner at Morrison & Hale, one of Manhattan's most prestigious mergers and acquisitions law firms, walked through the kitchen in his charcoal robe. He moved to the cabinet near the refrigerator, opened it without sound, and withdrew a water glass. Poured from the filtered pitcher, drank half, set the glass in the sink. The entire sequence took 45 seconds. I didn't look up from my laptop. He didn't acknowledge my presence. This was our marriage, now 2 people occupying the same 900 square feet of luxury real estate, performing a silent ballet of avoidance, so well rehearsed we could execute it in our sleep. How long had it been like this? 2 years, 3. The erosion had been so gradual, I couldn't identify the exact moment we'd stopped being a marriage and started being roommates with a shared address and a joint tax return. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. The bedroom door closed with a soft click that barely registered above the hum of the refrigerator. I returned to the spreadsheet, but my focus had fractured. The numbers blurred slightly at the edges. I blinked, refocused, scrolled down to the quarterly projections. Revenue up 12% year over year. Operating margins holding steady at 19%. The Provisions expansion into corporate catering had exceeded first-year targets by 34%. Every dollar on this screen represented something I'd created. I'd stood in industrial kitchens at 3 in the morning perfecting recipes. I'd negotiated with landlords, placated health inspectors, resolved staff conflicts, and personally scrubbed floors when the overnight cleaning crew called in sick. Warren had contributed exactly nothing to this success. He lived in the penthouse it paid for, wore the suits it subsidized, and attended the galas it sponsored. But he'd never tasted a single dish before it went on the menu, never reviewed a contract, never asked about my day beyond the perfunctory, "How was work?" that he'd stopped asking 2 years ago. I stared at the bottom line, $18 million, built from vision labor and relentless refusal to accept failure. When had we stopped being partners? When had the man I'd married become a stranger who walked through my kitchen like a ghost passing through walls? The sky outside had shifted from black to deep blue, that particular shade of pre-dawn that meant the city would wake soon. Delivery trucks would start their routes. Line cooks would arrive at altitude for prep. The machine I'd built would come to life without requiring my presence at every station. That was the mark of real success, building something that could function without you. But marriages weren't restaurants. You couldn't delegate intimacy, couldn't hire someone to handle the emotional inventory when you were too busy managing the business. I closed the laptop, set my coffee cup in the sink next to Warren's water glass, stared at them sitting side by side, two vessels that had briefly occupied the same space without touching. The ledger I needed to check wasn't on my laptop. It was wearing my last name and sleeping 20 feet away. I'd built an empire with these hands, every restaurant, every menu, every dollar earned through my vision and relentless work. I'd survived health department audits, economic downturns, staffing crises, and the cutthroat Manhattan restaurant scene that killed 9 out of 10 new establishments within their first year. I never suspected that my greatest danger wasn't a failed inspection or a bad quarter. It was sleeping in the bedroom at the end of the hall. That sense of danger crystallized at 8:15 Monday morning when I ran my weekly banking check. The number glowed on my laptop screen like a wound $8,500. Merchant Maison Balmain, Beverly Hills. Transaction date last Friday. I hadn't been to Beverly Hills in 3 years. Hadn't set foot in a Balmain boutique ever. The charge sat in our joint account, the one Warren and I maintained for household expenses and shared costs, bold and unexplained, against a column of groceries and utility payments. I picked up my phone and dialed Francine Keller. We'd shared a dorm room at Cornell 30 years ago, back when we both believed the world rewarded hard work with fairness. She'd become vice president at the bank a decade ago. I trusted her with my business accounts, and until this moment believed I could trust my marriage the same way. "Francine, I need to ask you about a charge on my joint account." Silence on the line. Not the comfortable pause of someone checking records, but the heavy quiet of someone choosing words carefully. "Maggie," she said, finally using the nickname only my oldest friends remembered. "I can't legally say anything, but you need to log in yourself and look at the full statements for the last 8 months. Tonight." My hand tightened on the phone. "Francine, what are you not telling me?" "Just look, tonight." The line went dead. I sat in my home office, morning light cutting sharp angles across the desk, and stared at that single transaction. $8,500. A number large enough to notice, but small enough that Warren might have assumed I wouldn't check or wouldn't care. The day passed in a blur of conference calls and vendor negotiations. I approved a menu revision at altitude, resolved a staffing conflict at our Brooklyn location, and reviewed the quarterly tax estimates with our accountant. Every task required my full attention, but my mind kept circling back to that glowing number. At 9 o'clock that night, after the last reservation had been served and the kitchen staff had clocked out, I returned to my office. Single desk lamp, locked door. I logged into the joint account's online banking portal and began scrolling backward through 8 months of statements. The first anomaly appeared in March, Four Seasons Boston one-night premium suite. I'd been in New York that entire week managing the spring menu launch. April Nobu. Wednesday evening party of 2. Warren had texted me that night saying late meeting at the office. May Nobu again. Another Wednesday. June LAX airport first-class ticket to Los Angeles. Return 3 days later. July through September 4, more Wednesday dinners at Nobu. 2 additional hotel stays in Boston. October Maison Balmain Beverly Hills, $8,500. I opened a spreadsheet and logged each transaction with merchant date and amount. When I finished, the total glowed at the bottom of the column, $47,300. 11 transactions, 8 months. A systematic pattern of spending that told a story I'd been too busy building an empire to read. How many Wednesday nights had I believed him when he said late meeting at the office while he sat at Nobu with someone else? I searched the Balmain transaction date and location on Instagram, filtering for recent posts geotagged in Beverly Hills. Third result, down a blonde woman in oversized sunglasses standing outside a luxury hotel, holding a distinctive black leather bag with gold hardware. The caption read, "Unexpected gifts make the best Fridays." Posted last Friday, the same day as the charge. The account name at celeste.brennan.nyc. I clicked through to her profile. Event consultant according to her bio. 3,000 followers. Photos of charity galas, restaurant openings, and carefully curated lifestyle shots that screamed wealth without showing the source. Celeste Brennan, 35, based on the college graduation year, visible in one throwback post. Professional socialite masquerading as a career. I took a screenshot of her profile and saved it to a new folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. Tuesday morning, I arrived at altitude before sunrise. The 42nd floor kitchen smelled like brown butter and fresh herbs, the familiar scent of prep work beginning. Early light slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Dominic Reyes stood at the main counter, 50 years old and 15 years loyal, breaking down a case of heirloom tomatoes with the precision of a surgeon. He looked up when I entered, took one look at my face, and set down his knife. What happened? I placed my phone on the stainless steel counter Celeste's Instagram photo displayed. Dominic stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. He set down the knife, carefully wiped his hands on his apron, and spoke in a voice I'd never heard him use before. I know her. The kitchen seemed to contract around those 3 words. 4 years ago, he continued, our catering company handled her wedding. Celeste Hartwell, she was called then, married a guy named Victor Sinclair at some estate in Westchester. Small ceremony, maybe 40 guests. I remember because she came into the kitchen during prep and asked me a question. He paused, looking at the photo again. What question? I asked. She said, Chef Dominic, what kind of white wine doesn't leave a strong scent when mixed into a cocktail? I thought it was about mixology. Gave her some recommendations for neutral whites, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc. She thanked me and left. The kitchen's industrial ventilation hummed in the silence between us. Looking at this photo now, Dominic said quietly, I don't think it was about mixology. The question about the wine wasn't about cocktails. It was about something you wouldn't smell, something you wouldn't taste until too late. Her wedding, I said. Who did she marry? Victor Sinclair. Some kind of financial consultant, I think. Nice guy. Seemed genuinely in love. I typed the name into my phone's search bar. The first result that appeared made my blood run cold. Obituary. Victor Sinclair, age 38. Date of death, November 2022. Cause accidental fall at Hemlock Ridge Resort, Catskills, New York. Survived by mother Harriet Sinclair. Dominic looked over my shoulder at the screen. His face went pale. Jesus, he whispered. I saved the obituary link to my receipts folder. 11 transactions. $47,000. A question about odorless wine, and a dead husband whose death was ruled an accident. Some accidents aren't accidents at all. If Victor Sinclair's death wasn't an accident, then someone had gotten away with murder for 3 years. The address in his obituary led me to a quiet Queens neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed and the secrets were buried deep. I stood on the porch of a modest brick house, Tuesday afternoon, my finger hovering over the doorbell. A wind chime made of sea glass tinkled in the autumn breeze. The door opened before I could press the button. Harriet Sinclair, 67, answered with the wary eyes of a woman who had spent 3 years being told she was delusional. Gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, cardigan sweater despite the mild weather, hands that trembled slightly when she gripped the doorframe. Mrs. Sinclair, I said. My name is Lorraine Fletcher. I think my husband is involved with Celeste Brennan. Harriet went rigid. Her knuckles whitened on the door frame. Then she stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Come in," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for someone like you for 3 years." The living room smelled like old paper and lavender air freshener. Every surface was covered. Dozens of manila folders stacked on the coffee table. Printed photographs pinned to a corkboard leaning against the wall. Handwritten notes on yellow legal pads arranged in chronological order across the couch. This wasn't the living room of a grieving mother. This was the headquarters of a solo investigation that no one had believed. Harriet gestured to the only clear chair, a wingback near the window. I sat. She remained standing, hands clasped in front of her like a professor about to deliver a lecture she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. "Everyone told me I couldn't accept that my son died in an accident," she began. "The police, the insurance investigator, Victor's friends, even my own sister said I was making it worse by refusing to move on." She picked up a folder from the coffee table. "But mothers know. We know when something is wrong with our children. We know when someone has hurt them." She opened the folder. Inside were printed text messages, bank statements, and photographs of a blonde woman I recognized from Instagram. "This was my son's last phone," Harriet said, pointing to a device sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag. "There's an audio recording inside. Victor left it 3 days before he died. He knew he was in danger." My throat tightened. "What did the police say when you showed them?" "They said it was evidence of nothing. That worried husbands make dramatic recordings all the time. That grief was making me see patterns where none existed." Harriet set the folder down carefully. "Tell me about your husband." I told her about the bank account, the transactions over 8 months, the woman with the Balmain bag who'd been married to her son. Harriet listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. "The pattern," she whispered when I finished. "She's doing it again." Harriet was the image of what I could become if I failed to act a mother alone in a room full of evidence no one would see. She pulled another folder from the pile, this one worn at the edges from repeated handling. Inside were photocopies of a journal, pages filled with Victor's neat handwriting. "These are from the last month of his life," Harriet said. She began reading aloud, her voice steady, despite the tears gathering in her eyes. October 23rd. "Woke up dizzy for the 4th consecutive day. Celeste says I'm not sleeping enough. But I've never felt vertigo like this before. I'm scared. Don't know what to do." She turned the page. October 30th, changed the bank account passwords today. Celeste asked why. I told her I forgot the old ones. She smiled. That smile made me cold. Another page. November 2nd. "If I die, don't let her get the insurance. I haven't had time to change the beneficiary. Mom, if you're reading this, you know what to do." Harriet set the journal down. The living room was silent except for the ticking of a mantel clock and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. "He died 5 days later," she said. "Fell from a deck at Hemlock Ridge Resort in the Catskills. The railing was deemed structurally sound. No witnesses. Celeste claimed she'd been inside the cabin when it happened. The insurance company paid out $4.5 million. $4.5 million. The same amount that was likely listed on my own policy with Warren as beneficiary." I picked up the journal, careful as if handling evidence, which it was. Victor's handwriting was precise, controlled the penmanship of someone who'd been taught to document things properly. But the words themselves were desperate. "He knew," I said quietly. "Victor knew he was being killed and couldn't stop it. For 3 years, everyone told me I was a grieving mother who couldn't accept an accident," Harriet said. "But mothers know. We know." I set the journal down. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture I couldn't unsee. Celeste had asked Dominic about odorless wine. Victor had written about unexplained dizziness. He'd changed his passwords. He'd warned about the insurance beneficiary. Then he died at a resort with a convenient railing failure. Now Celeste was with Warren. The stolen money, the luxury purchases, the Wednesday night dinners. This wasn't about catching my husband in an affair. This was about staying alive. "I need an investigator," I said. Not to confirm what I already know, but to find what I don't. I know someone, Harriet replied. Private investigator, former NYPD. He believed me when no one else did. Couldn't prove anything legally, but he never stopped trying. She wrote a name and number on a notepad, Curtis Hayes. I stood collecting the folder with Victor's journal copies. May I take this? Take whatever you need. Just promise me something. Harriet's eyes were dry now, hard with purpose. Make them pay for what they did to my son. I promise. I set the journal down. My hands weren't shaking. But inside, something had just locked shut the softest part of me. The part that still wanted to believe I was mistaken was gone. What replaced it was colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. And I knew exactly where to find the proof I needed next. The proof I needed was waiting in Altitude's back office Wednesday morning, contained in 32 seconds of audio that would change everything. The voice of a dead man filled my restaurant's back office, recorded 48 hours before he died, and every word was a nail in my husband's coffin. I'd locked the door. Dominic stood guard in the hallway outside, turning away any staff who tried to approach. Harriet sat across from me at the small desk, Victor's phone, sealed in its plastic bag, resting between us like evidence at a crime scene. I've listened to this recording 200 times, Harriet said quietly. Maybe more. I can recite every word, every pause, every background sound, but I never knew what it meant until now. She pressed play. Static crackle. Then Victor's voice slightly muffled, as if he'd been holding the phone in his pocket while recording. Young, uncertain, afraid. He said he'd handle it. He said Celeste wouldn't cause any more trouble. I asked him what he planned to do. He said, a pause. Background noise, maybe traffic. Then, R will take care of it. Don't worry. Shuffling sounds, movement. The audio cut out. 32 seconds. That was all Victor had managed to capture before whatever happened next. 32 seconds that Harriet had carried alone for 3 years, not knowing who R was or what it meant. I stared out the window at Manhattan's skyline. The morning sun caught the glass facades of surrounding buildings, turning them into mirrors reflecting light I couldn't quite look at directly. For 3 years, I didn't know who R was, Harriet said. I played this for the police, for the insurance investigator, for Victor's friends. No one could tell me, or no one would. I know who R is, I said softly. Harriet's head snapped up. Warren Fletcher, my husband. Everyone calls him Rick. On internal company emails, he initials everything as R. Fletcher. The office was silent except for the distant clatter of kitchen prep, starting for lunch service. Somewhere below us, line cooks were arriving, knives being sharpened, stations being set up. The ordinary machinery of a restaurant day beginning while we sat here listening to a dead man's warning. Harriet's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. Your husband knew my son. Your husband promised to take care of whatever problem Celeste was having. And 5 days later, my son was dead. Yes, I said, because there was nothing else to say, no comfort to offer, just the cold confirmation she'd been seeking for 3 years. How many times had Harriet and I circled the same predator without knowing the other existed 2 women, hunting the same monster from different sides of the kill? Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Midtown to a 3rd-floor office with frosted glass and a door labeled Hayes Investigations in simple black letters. The hallway smelled like old carpet and the coffee shop 1 floor down. Curtis Hayes, 48, had the weathered face of someone who'd spent 20 years with NYPD before going private. His office was small but organized filing cabinets along one wall desk with 2 client chairs window overlooking a narrow view of the street below. The space smelled like coffee and old paperwork, the particular scent of a man who'd spent decades documenting other people's secrets. Mrs. Fletcher, he said, gesturing to a chair. Harriet called ahead. Said you had information about Celeste Brennan. I sat. I need you to investigate her. My husband is involved with her, Curtis finished. He walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. You just saved me a 20-minute presentation. I've been investigating this woman under retainer from Mrs. Harriet Sinclair for 2 years. He set the folder on the desk between us. 2 years, I repeated. Since 6 months after Victor Sinclair's death. Harriet didn't believe the accident story. Hired me to dig. I've been digging ever since. He opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, financial records, timeline charts mapping Celeste's movements across 2 years. Last week I found the newest link. 2 separate investigations, Harriet and Curtis on one track, Dominic and me on another, had been running parallel without knowing it. And now they'd just converged in this midtown office. Curtis spread the evidence across his desk. Photos of Celeste at various locations, bank records showing deposits that didn't match her stated income, a timeline of men she'd approached at charity events, business conferences, restaurant openings. Then he placed a new photo on top of the pile. This was taken 3 weeks ago outside the Four Seasons, Curtis said. The photo showed Celeste in a black dress standing close to a young man in an expensive suit. His hand rested on the small of her back in a gesture that spoke of intimacy. He was handsome in that polished Manhattan way. Dark hair, strong jawline, the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether doors would open for him. Garrett Thornton, Curtis said, 32 years old, associate attorney at Morrison & Hale, corporate mergers and acquisitions. The name hit me like cold water. Morrison & Hale, Warren's firm. He works directly under your husband, Curtis continued. Warren Fletcher is listed as his supervising partner on the firm directory. I stared at the photo. Garrett Thornton. The name rattled around my memory, catching on something. I've heard that name before, I said slowly. Curtis leaned forward. Where? Then it clicked. He dined at Altitude, twice last month. I remember because our reservation system flags repeat customers who book premium tables. I pulled out my phone, opened the restaurant's back-end portal, scrolled through October's bookings. There. October 8th and October 22nd, Garrett Thornton, both times table for 2. Garrett Thornton. The name hit me like cold water. I knew it because he'd eaten at my restaurant at my tables, probably planning his next move over my food. Do you know who his dinner companion was? Curtis asked. I checked the reservation notes. No guest name listed, just party of 2. Curtis pulled another photo from his folder. Celeste entering Altitude's lobby, October 8th timestamp in the corner. I can tell you who it was, he said quietly. I remembered now, clear as glass, sharp as a knife. Garrett Thornton dined at Altitude twice last month. Both times the reservation system logged at table for 2. And both times he didn't come alone. I needed to know what they'd been planning in my own restaurant. The security footage from those dinners would tell me everything. But first, I had to survive Thursday. Sitting across from Warren at our candlelit dinner table, I discovered I was an excellent actress when the alternative was death. The penthouse dining room glowed with soft light from tapered candles I'd lit an hour earlier. Warren had ordered takeout from Altitude, my own restaurant's signature duck confit, arranged on our wedding china, the irony sharp enough to cut. He'd opened a Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The wine tasted like copper and oak on my tongue, rich and complex. How was your day? I asked, cutting into the duck with practiced precision. Long. The Hartford merger is dragging. Their legal team keeps finding new concerns. Warren swirled his wine, watching the legs slide down the glass. But that's the job. How about you booking still solid 100% through Thanksgiving? We had to turn away a corporate party of 50 yesterday, no availability. That's my girl. He smiled across the table. You've built something remarkable. I returned the smile. Let my hand rest near his on the tablecloth. Every gesture calculated, every word measured. Inside, my mind was running through Curtis's evidence folders, Victor's journal entries, that audio recording. But on the surface, I was simply his wife of 13 years enjoying dinner. Dominic mentioned he's working on spring menu concepts, Warren said. Anything exciting? He's exploring Nordic influences, lots of preserved and fermented elements. I think it could be distinctive. The conversation flowed like water, effortless and shallow. We'd perfected this dance over more than a decade, 2 people who'd learned to fill silence with words that meant nothing. Except now I understood that Warren's performance was deliberate. Mine had only just begun. Marriage, I realized, is the longest con, two people performing their roles so thoroughly that neither remembers which parts are real. Warren refilled my wine glass. The sound of liquid pouring was steady, controlled. He set the bottle down carefully, then reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin was warm, his touch gentle. Honey. He said, his voice dropping to that intimate tone I'd once found comforting. I know you've been working too hard, running yourself into the ground with the restaurants and the catering expansion. I'm fine, I started. You're not fine. You're exhausted. His thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand. So I did something. I booked you a week-long retreat in the Catskills, Hemlock Ridge Resort. It's supposed to be beautiful, completely secluded right on the ridge with these incredible views. First week of December, I want you to go alone, truly unwind. No phone calls, no staff emergencies, just you and the mountains. The name hit me like ice water. Hemlock Ridge Resort. From Curtis's files, from Harriet's investigation folders, from the obituary that had started all of this. Victor Sinclair died at Hemlock Ridge Resort, November 2022. Same location, exact same location. Warren was offering me the murder site as a gift wrapped in concern and delivered with a smile. I looked into his eyes, saw nothing but warmth and care, maybe a flash of something else beneath triumph, anticipation. How thoughtful of you, I said, my voice steady. That sounds perfect. You deserve it. You work so hard you never take time for yourself. He squeezed my hand. Promise me you'll actually go. No backing out at the last minute because of some kitchen emergency. I promise. The lie tasted like ash, but my smile never wavered. Dinner continued. Warren talked about his M&A deal, about a partner at the firm who was retiring, about needing to replace the living room curtains. I listened, responded, laughed at appropriate moments. We ate dessert tiramisu from the Italian place on Columbus and drank espresso from the small cups I'd bought in Florence on our 5th anniversary. By 9:30, the dishes were washed. Warren retreated to his study to check emails. I wiped down the counters, put away the wine glasses, and thought about how many times I'd performed this exact routine without seeing the danger standing 15 feet away. At 10, I kissed him goodnight at the bedroom door. Brief, familiar, perfect in its practiced ease. Warren was already in bed when I changed into pajamas and slid under the covers. The sheets smelled like lavender from the detergent I'd used last weekend. His breathing was already deep and steady. The bourbon he'd had after dinner ensured he'd sleep soundly. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. My mind was already working through logistics. Curtis would need to increase surveillance. I'd need to document everything: emails, bank statements, the resort reservation itself. Harriet's evidence combined with mine would create an undeniable pattern. The irony was almost beautiful. He'd just handed me his murder weapon by telling me where he planned to use it. Warren thought he was setting a trap, thought he'd send his wife to the same resort where Victor had died, stage another convenient accident, collect the insurance money, and move on with Celeste to find the next victim. He had no idea I'd already seen the playbook, that I knew exactly how this story was supposed to end. But stories only end the way their authors intend when no one rewrites them. I turned my head slightly, watching Warren's profile in the darkness. His face was peaceful in sleep, almost boyish. The face of a man who believed he'd won, who believed his wife suspected nothing, saw nothing, knew nothing. Let him believe it. Let him think I was the same woman who'd built an empire while he planned to cash in on my death. Let him think I'd walk into Hemlock Ridge Resort in December like Victor had 3 years ago, trusting unsuspecting easy prey. I would accept the trip to the Catskills, but not the way he thought. When I walked into that resort, I wouldn't be walking into his trap. I'd be setting my own. And when it closed, Warren and Celeste and everyone involved in Victor's death would be caught inside. First, I needed to gather an army. The army I needed started with one person, Curtis Hayes, and Friday morning he handed me the ammunition. The manila folder Curtis slid across his desk contained a number that made my blood run cold: $9 million, the price Warren had placed on my death. Curtis's office smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner, bitter and burnt. Rain streaked the window behind him, blurring the midtown street below into watercolor grays. He sat with his hands folded on the desk, the manila folder between us like a declaration of war. "I pulled your life insurance records last night," Curtis said. "Contact at the State Insurance Commission. Took some favors, but I got the full file." He opened the folder. Inside were photocopied documents with official letterhead policy numbers, premium schedules, and signature pages. I scanned the first page, my business training automatically processing the columns of numbers. Life insurance policy issued to Lorraine Fletcher. Coverage amount $4.5 million. I looked up. "That's not right. Our policy is $500,000. We took it out when we bought the penthouse." "That was your policy," Curtis said. 6 months ago, April of this year, someone increased the coverage to $4.5 million. April. I did the math. 6 months before the December Catskills trip Warren had booked. 6 months of planning of setting pieces on a board I hadn't known existed. "And that's not the worst part," Curtis said. He slid the signature page across the desk. I stared at my name written in ink that looked like mine, but wasn't. The loops were wrong, too wide on the L, too narrow on the R. The pressure was wrong, too light in places my hand would have pressed harder. The slant was wrong, angling right when mine tilted left. "I didn't sign this," I said quietly. "I know." Curtis tapped the signature with his finger. "Federal insurance fraud. Title 18, United States Code Section 1033. Forging an insurance document carries 10 to 15 years in federal prison." The rain against the window sounded like static white noise filling the spaces between words. "This isn't just divorce anymore, Mrs. Fletcher," Curtis continued. "This isn't even just murder conspiracy. This is a federal crime with a paper trail, and more importantly, it proves premeditation. You can't claim impulse when you forge documents 6 months in advance. You can't claim crime of passion when you spend half a year planning every detail." I touched the signature page. The paper felt smooth and cold under my fingertips. "What does it say about a marriage when your husband can calculate your death down to the exact dollar and still kiss you goodnight?" "There's more," Curtis said. He pulled out another document, this one marked with highlighted sections. "The accidental death rider. Standard clause on most large policies, but worth understanding exactly what it means." He read aloud, "In the event the insured dies as a result of accident as defined in Section 4C, the death benefit shall be doubled in full within 30 days of claim approval." Doubled. I looked at the policy amount again, $4.5 million. If you die in an accident, Curtis said, any accident, car crash, fall drowning, anything that's ruled accidental death, as opposed to natural causes, the payout doubles to $9 million. $9 million. The number sat in the air between us, heavy and precise. "Victor Sinclair's policy," I said. $1.2 million, November 2022. Curtis pulled out a comparison sheet he'd prepared. Same pattern, larger scale. Victor died at Hemlock Ridge Resort in what was ruled an accidental fall. Celeste collected the full accidental death payout. Now Warren's sending you to the same resort with a policy 7.5 times larger. I stared at the numbers Curtis had laid out in neat columns. Base policy amounts, accidental death multipliers, payout totals, dates of deaths compared to dates of policy increases. Warren had spent 6 months on this, forging signatures, increasing coverage, adding riders, booking the resort, calculating every piece down to the exact clause that would maximize profit. 6 months. He'd been signing my death warrant for half a year while I'd been signing catering contracts. The timeline is too perfect. I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. April, he increases the policy. October, he books the Catskills trip for December. That's 8 months of planning. He needed time for the policy to season to avoid the 2-year contestability period scrutiny. Curtis nodded. Insurance companies look harder at policies less than 2 years old. He's being cautious. Professional. Professional, I repeated. The word tasted like metal. I looked at the signature page again. At my name written in someone else's hand. At the dollar amounts that added up to 9 million reasons for Warren to want me dead. $9 million. I'd built an $18 million restaurant empire from a single food truck. I'd worked 16-hour days for 13 years. I'd survived Manhattan's cutthroat hospitality scene, economic downturns, health department audits, and competitors who'd wanted nothing more than to watch me fail. And Warren thought I'd be easy to erase for half of what I'd built. Thought he could forge my signature stage, an accident, collect the payout, and move on with Celeste to find their next victim. Thought I was worth more dead than alive. What's the next step? I asked Curtis. Document everything. I'm building a federal case insurance fraud conspiracy to commit murder, potentially RICO charges, if we can prove this is a pattern between Warren and Celeste across multiple victims. He paused. But first, you need to protect your assets. If Warren's planning your death, he's also planning how to access your business holdings. You need an attorney. Not a divorce attorney, you need a barracuda. He wrote a name on his notepad and slid it across the desk. Clarice Winters, attorney at law. I stared at that number $9 million and thought you underestimated me from day one. You saw a woman who built an empire and thought she'd be easy to erase. You were wrong. And I was about to show him exactly how wrong. I showed him Friday afternoon when I walked into the office of the woman who'd made a career out of destroying men like Warren. Clarice Winters' office walls were lined with framed court victories, a gallery of men who'd underestimated her clients, and I was about to add my husband to that collection. The office occupied a corner suite on the 38th floor of a midtown tower, all glass and steel with views that stretched across Manhattan. Clarice Winters, 55, sat behind a desk that looked like it had witnessed 1,000 confessions. She had silver hair cut short and efficient a navy suit that probably cost what most people paid in monthly rent, and eyes that evaluated me with the precision of a surgeon deciding where to cut. "Mrs. Fletcher," she said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her desk. Curtis Hayes called ahead. He said you needed asset protection, and you needed it yesterday. I sat. The leather was cool and smooth under my hands. My husband forged my signature on a life insurance policy 6 months ago. If I die in an accident, he collects $9 million. He's planning to kill me at Hemlock Ridge Resort in December, the same place where his mistress's previous husband died 3 years ago. Clarice picked up a pen and began taking notes. Her face remained professionally neutral, but I saw the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was already calculating angles of attack. "Federal insurance fraud," she said. "Title 18. And that's just what we can see on the surface. What else?" I laid out the complete picture. Victor's death, Celeste's pattern, Warren's audio recording, the systematic spending from our joint account, the Catskills trip offered as a gift. Everything Curtis and Harriet had uncovered over weeks of investigation. When I finished, Clarice set down her pen. "First priority comprehensive asset check," she said. "I need to see what else he's been doing with your money while planning your funeral. Men like this don't stop at insurance fraud. If he's willing to forge one document, he's willing to forge 100. She pulled her keyboard closer and began typing with the speed of someone who'd done this investigation 1,000 times before. "Retainer is $50,000, Clarice said without looking up. "Non-refundable, and worth every penny when I'm done." I signed the agreement she slid across the desk. Clarice worked in focused silence for the next 2 hours, her fingers moving across the keyboard, her second monitor displaying documents I couldn't read from my angle. The office smelled like expensive coffee and the leather-bound law books lining the shelves behind her desk. Rain continued to fall outside the weather, matching the cold fury building in my chest. "Found it," Clarice said finally. She turned her monitor so I could see. Corporate filing documents. State of Delaware. Date of incorporation, July 2025. 4 months ago, Warren incorporated a Delaware LLC, Clarice explained. Delaware provides the highest tier of corporate anonymity in the United States, popular with legitimate businesses, but also popular with people hiding assets in divorce. She scrolled down. He's been systematically transferring marital assets into this LLC structure, including your restaurant shares. My restaurant shares. The 30% stake Warren held in Altitude as co-owner, shares I'd given him when the business had grown enough to need his legal expertise for expansion. "There's more," Clarice continued. Her voice had taken on the tone of someone delivering bad news she'd seen too many times. He tied your name to a fraudulent business debt within the LLC structure, $2.3 million. If you die before discovering it, your estate inherits the full liability. The mathematics were elegant in their cruelty. Kill me, collect $9 million from insurance, stick my estate with debt transfer clean assets into his LLC, and walk away with Celeste to find their next victim. Marriage and murder. I realized are both about long-term planning. The difference is which one of you is still standing at the end. In 20 years of practice, Clarice said quietly, "I've never seen premeditation this thorough. Your husband is either a genius or a sociopath. Probably both." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "Better than stop it, we can turn it into a weapon." Clarice opened a new file on her computer. "When did you originally incorporate Altitude?" 2012, 13 years ago. "And when did Warren become a partner?" "Same year. I gave him shares when we expanded to the second location." Clarice pulled up the original LLC operating agreement I'd filed with New York State, scanned through pages of dense legal language, then stopped on page 7, section 12. "Right of first refusal," she read aloud. "If any member attempts to transfer, sell, or otherwise convey their ownership interest to a third party, all other members shall have the right to purchase said interest at fair market value before any transfer can be completed. This right is absolute and irrevocable under New York Business Corporation law." She looked up at me. "You wrote this clause." "My first attorney insisted on it, said it was standard protection in partnership agreements." I stared at the screen. I forgot it existed. "Lucky for us, contracts don't forget." Clarice began typing. "If Warren is attempting to transfer his shares into that Delaware LLC, you have the absolute legal right to purchase them first. And the moment I serve notice triggering that clause, his entire 30% stake freezes solid. Can't move anywhere until the dispute is resolved." 13 years ago, I'd written that clause to protect myself from business risk, never imagining the biggest risk would be the man I'd married. "How fast can you do this?" I asked. "Notice can be served immediately, email and certified mail. I'll also file a preliminary injunction in New York Supreme Court, freezing all assets within his Delaware LLC under debtor and creditor law. The fraudulent debt he tied to your name gives us grounds." Clarice's fingers flew across the keyboard. "By tomorrow morning, his entire escape plan will be frozen in place, and he won't know what hit him until the bank notification arrives in his inbox." I left Clarice's office at 11 o'clock Saturday morning. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and gleaming under weak November sun. My phone buzzed with a text from Clarice. Notice served. Injunction filed. Clock starts now. Warren's 30% stake in Altitude was frozen solid, legally untouchable, unmovable. He didn't know it yet, but he would soon, the moment the bank's notification email arrived in his inbox. I wondered how long it would take him to realize his perfect plan had just hit a wall. Warren didn't realize his plan had hit a wall. But Monday night, someone who knew exactly how high that wall was came to tell me everything. The knock on Altitude's back door came at 10:30 p.m., an hour after closing, in the dark alley where only staff and delivery drivers ever ventured, and the man standing there was shaking like he'd seen a ghost. I'd been finishing paperwork in my back office, the kind of end-of-day accounting that never seemed to end no matter how successful the restaurant became. The knock was unusual enough that I walked to the door myself instead of calling security. Looked through the peephole. Garrett Thornton stood in the alley wearing a low-brimmed baseball cap, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes darting toward the street like he expected someone to appear behind him. The confident young attorney from Curtis's surveillance photos looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. I opened the door. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to speak with you. I didn't know where else to go." I recognized him instantly from the photos Curtis had shown me. Warren's associate. The man who dined at my restaurant twice with someone Curtis suspected was Celeste. The third player in a conspiracy I was only beginning to understand. "I know who you are," I said. "You work for my husband. Why are you here?" "Because 3 weeks ago I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear, and now I'm terrified." I brought him inside and locked the door behind us. The kitchen was dark except for the security lights over the prep stations, casting long shadows across the stainless steel surfaces. The air smelled like the remnants of dinner service butter herbs, the ghost of seared meat. In my office, Garrett sat in the chair across from my desk and wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands trembled when he pulled off his cap. "I helped Celeste Brennan with legal paperwork after her husband died," he said. "Warren asked me to handle it, said it was routine estate work, probate insurance claims, asset transfers. I thought I was just doing my job. I didn't know Victor Sinclair had been murdered. I didn't know I was helping cover up a crime." "When did you find out?" I asked. His jaw tightened. 3 weeks ago. I was working late at the firm. Around 8 p.m., I walked past the conference room on the executive floor. The door wasn't fully latched. I could hear voices inside. He stopped, swallowed hard. Warren was on the phone with Celeste. Speaker on. I heard him say, "Maggie's trip to the Catskills needs to go smoothly. First week December as planned." And Celeste said, "Like last time, or ensuring no complications like last time?" Warren laughed. He said, "Exactly like last time. Same location, same method. Tyler's already in position at the resort." The office was silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units in the kitchen beyond. "I froze in that hallway," Garrett continued, "because I understood exactly what last time meant. Victor Sinclair, November 2022, Hemlock Ridge Resort. The estate I'd helped Celeste settle. And I realized I'd been helping them cover up murder without knowing it. How many people does it take to murder someone and call it an accident? A husband, a mistress, a brother, a terrified associate who wishes he'd never heard the truth. You heard my husband planning my murder," I said quietly, "and you waited 3 weeks to tell me." I was terrified. I still am. His voice broke slightly. "If I go to the FBI, I'm an accessory. If I do nothing, you die, and I live with that forever. I don't have a lawyer. I don't know what to do. So I came to you." I called Curtis. He arrived at altitude within 20 minutes. Tuesday morning, the three of us sat in my office with coffee. None of us were drinking. Garrett had spent the night at a hotel under a false name, paid cash, turned off his phone. Curtis had brought a recording device and consent forms. Everything Garrett said now was documented. First week of December. Garrett said, staring at the wall calendar, "That's 21 days from now. Warren expects you at Hemlock Ridge Resort between December 1st and 7th. Curtis pulled out his laptop and opened a file. "Tyler Brennan. I've been tracking a suspicious new maintenance worker at the resort for the past 2 months. Couldn't identify him. He's working under an alias, fake social security number. Now I know why." He looked at Garrett. "Tyler is Celeste's brother. Younger brother, 29 years old. He's been at that resort for exactly 2 months, which matches Warren's planning timeline perfectly. 2 months. The same time frame as Warren's Delaware LLC asset transfers the forged insurance documents, the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built. Warren's planning to finalize all asset transfers within 3 weeks, Garrett added. That's what he told his financial advisor last week. If his Delaware LLC isn't legally blocked by then, everything moves offshore. Already blocked, I said. My attorney served notice on Saturday. His assets are frozen. Garrett's eyes widened. He doesn't know yet. Not yet, but he will. Curtis tapped the calendar date. 2 parallel deadlines converging. The Catskills murder attempt between December 1st and 7th, and Warren's financial escape plan that was supposed to finalize before you died. 21 days. In 3 weeks, Warren expected me to walk into that resort and never walk out. I stood and walked to the calendar hanging on my office wall, picked up a red marker and circled December 1st. The ink bled slightly into the paper, stark and final. Tyler's the one who'll stage the accident, Curtis said. Maintenance worker has access to everything: railing, stairs, electrical systems, plumbing. Whatever method they used on Victor, they'll replicate. Same location, same method. I repeated, echoing what Garrett had heard. They're not even trying to be creative. They found something that worked once and they're using it again. Garrett looked at me. What are you going to do? I stared at that circled date. 21 days until Warren expected me to die. 21 days to turn his trap into mine. I'm going to the Catskills, I said, but I won't go as a victim. I looked at Curtis, then at Garrett, trembling in his chair. I'll go as the hunter who knows exactly where the trap is hidden. But before I could hunt, I needed to understand exactly how long Warren had been planning to kill me. The answer came Wednesday morning, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Curtis's words rewrote everything I thought I knew. Your husband didn't meet Celeste 18 months ago. He's been planning this for 5 years. We sat in Curtis's office Wednesday morning, the third-floor midtown space that smelled permanently of coffee and old case files. Rain streaked the windows again, turning the street below into blurred shapes and muted colors. Curtis had spent 2 weeks on what he called a historical deep dive, pulling tax records, corporate filings, anything that might show how Warren and Celeste's relationship really began. What he found changed everything. 5 years ago. Curtis said, spreading documents across his desk, Warren worked as the M&A attorney on a business restructuring deal. The client was Victor Sinclair. I stared at the billing records. Warren, Fletcher Morrison, and Hale LLP. Client Sinclair Financial Consulting. 40 hours billed over 3 months in 2020. Part of that restructuring work, Curtis continued, included reviewing Victor's corporate life insurance clause. Warren saw the exact policy value $1.2 million from day one. And that's when he met Celeste. She was Victor's wife. She attended 2 of the client meetings. The timeline assembled itself in my mind like a prosecution exhibit. Warren meets Celeste during Victor's legal work, sees the life insurance value, begins a relationship, waits, plans, executes. Victor wasn't an accident, I said quietly. Victor was the blueprint, and I'm the second version. Exactly. Curtis pulled out another document, Warren's tax returns from 5 years ago. This isn't a pattern that developed. This is a system Warren built, tested on Victor, and is now replicating with you. Different target, larger payout, same method. 5 years. While I was building restaurants and signing catering contracts, my husband was building a murder blueprint he'd use on me. How did I never see this, I asked. Because you weren't looking for it. People rarely do. Curtis closed the file. But there's more. Visual evidence. Dominic found something yesterday. Thursday morning, I stood in Altitude's basement, a space most guests never knew existed. The catering division kept digital archives here, every event filmed, cataloged, stored on secure servers for client records and liability protection. The room hummed with the white noise of cooling fans and hard drives. Dominic stood at the main terminal, Curtis beside him. I'd called them both down after Curtis's revelation. I pulled the wedding video after you showed me Celeste's photo. Dominic said, his hands moving across the keyboard. Wanted to confirm it was the same woman, 4 years ago. Celeste Hartwell marrying Victor Sinclair. 200 guests. We handled everything food service documentation. The video loaded on the monitor. High definition, multiple camera angles, professional quality. My company's work preserved in perfect detail. I found something else, Dominic said. 2 moments, minute 23 and minute 47. He cued to minute 23. The scene showed the receiving line after the ceremony. Victor in a sharp gray suit, Celeste in an ivory dress with cap sleeves. Guests filing past congratulations and embraces. Then Warren appeared on screen. I felt my breath catch. Warren shook Victor's hand, firm, professional, turned to Celeste. Air kissed her cheek in that Manhattan social way, but the camera caught what was supposed to look casual. Warren's hand rested too low on Celeste's back. During the greeting, lingered a half-second too long. Their eyes locked, not the gaze of strangers being introduced, but intimate recognition. The look of 2 people who knew each other's bodies, who'd made plans in private, who were performing for an audience that included the man they intended to kill. Victor stood 18 inches away, smiling, completely oblivious. That's not how strangers greet each other, Curtis said quietly. Dominic fast-forwarded to minute 47. The camera angle shifted, roaming videographer catching candid moments. The frame showed the bar area guests collecting drinks. Then movement in the background behind the decorative room dividers our catering team had set up. Warren and Celeste, alone. Quick exchange. Warren slipped Celeste a thick manila envelope. It looked like cash or documents or both. The movement was practiced casual, the gesture of people who'd done this before. Celeste tucked it into her clutch without looking, smiled at something Warren said. He touched her face, brief, possessive. 20 feet away, center of the reception hall, Victor laughed with his groomsmen, raised a champagne glass, celebrated his marriage to a woman who was already planning how to collect on his death. The cruelest irony, I'd filmed my own husband's conspiracy and filed it away in my basement, preserving the evidence of what he'd do to me next. I was in the kitchen that day. I said, my voice sounding distant. Running operations, making sure every plate went out perfect. I never watched this footage after we delivered it to the client. Lucky you archived it, Curtis said. Lucky. That was one word for it. I stared at the frozen frame. Warren's hand passing the envelope, Celeste's knowing smile, Victor's oblivious joy in the background. My company had captured this moment 4 years ago. My cameras, my employees, my professional-grade equipment documenting a conspiracy that would later target me. The wedding had been beautiful. I remembered that vaguely. The venue overlooking the Hudson. The first-course scallops that Dominic had perfected. The thank you note Celeste had sent afterward praising our attention to detail. I'd never suspected that while my staff served dinner, my husband was passing his accomplice what looked like the first payment in a murder scheme. Can this be used as evidence? I asked. Absolutely, Curtis said. It's your company's footage, properly archived, time-stamped chain of custody intact. Shows Warren and Celeste in intimate contact at an event 4 years ago before Victor's death, after Warren worked on Victor's insurance review. Establishes prior relationship potential motive timeline of conspiracy. I looked at Dominic. Neither of us said a word. I saved the file to an encrypted drive and disconnected it from the network. This was my evidence recorded by my own company, preserved in my own archives, documenting my own husband's plot to commit the exact same crime against me that he'd committed against Victor. No one could ever claim I fabricated it. The metadata was ironclad, the timestamps undeniable, the footage professionally shot and legally archived. And Warren had no idea I had it. Warren had no idea I possessed that video. And Friday night, while he dined with his accomplice at Manhattan's most expensive restaurant, I watched in real time from 20 blocks away. The surveillance photo arrived on my phone at 8:47 p.m. Warren pouring wine at Le Bernardin, while Curtis watched from 3 tables away, and I watched from the penthouse hunting my own husband through pixels on a screen. Le Bernardin. Michelin 3-star French, where dinner costs $300 per person before wine. The kind of place Warren took important clients, not his wife. Curtis had positioned himself 3 tables away, angled view sending photos every few minutes. The first image showed Warren and Celeste at a corner table, candlelight reflecting off crystal and silver. Warren held a bottle the label clear enough to read even in Curtis's photo, Chateau de Beaucastel, 2015, the kind of Burgundy sommeliers recommend with reverence. Second photo. Warren pouring the wine into Celeste's glass, the liquid catching light like liquid ruby. Third photo, Celeste shaking her head. Not the polite decline of someone who preferred white, but something more deliberate. Her fingertips pushed the glass aside gently but firmly. In the next frame, she was ordering sparkling water, instead the server's posture, suggesting surprise. Fourth photo. Warren's face, slight frown mouth moving, asking something. Celeste's response caught in profile, a small, tight smile. Brief reply. Warren's expression shifting from question to something else. Acceptance, maybe, or calculation. I stared at that sequence on my phone. Why would a 35-year-old woman at a $300 dinner refuse premium Burgundy? What do you call 13 years of marriage built on a murder plan, love, or the longest con ever played? The answer came Sunday afternoon in Clarice's office. Garrett arrived looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Probably hadn't. He carried his laptop in a protective case hands, shaking slightly when he set it on Clarice's conference table. The office was quiet on Sunday, just the three of us in the glass-walled room that overlooked Midtown. "I got it," Garrett said. "The email," before IT could finish scrubbing the server. He opened his laptop. The screen showed an email client timestamp from 4 years ago. I recognized the interface. Warren's law firm used the same system for client correspondence. Garrett turned the laptop so Clarice and I could read. From r.fletcher@morrisonhale.com to v.personal@securemail.net. Date, October 15th, 2021. Subject framework confirmed. V. Victor signed new insurance framework. Policy value $1.2 million. Timeline as discussed. After that, need 18 to 24 months for things to settle before next step. Ours. The email sat there on the screen, 11 sentences that rewrote my entire marriage. Digital signature verified as Warren's, Garrett said. Metadata confirms it was sent from his company device office IP address specific timestamp. This is ironclad. Clarice leaned forward reading. 4 years ago, October 2021. Victor died November 2022, 13 months later. And the email mentions next step after an 18 to 24 month settling period. That settling period ended, I said slowly, about 18 months ago, right around when Warren supposedly met Celeste and began their affair. Wrong, Clarice said. He'd known Celeste for years at that point. This email proves it. But more importantly, she tapped the screen. Next step. 4 years ago, Warren was already planning the step after Victor. That next step was you. The conference room was silent except for the building's ventilation system humming through the ceiling vents. I thought about timelines. 13 years ago, Warren and I had met at a charity gala. He'd approached me near the bar, made a joke about the overpriced wine, asked about my food truck business that was just starting to grow. We'd talked for 2 hours. Married, 18 months later. 9th year of our marriage, Warren had sent this email. Planning Victor's insurance fraud while already positioning himself with me, building toward whatever came after. 3 years ago, Victor died at Hemlock Ridge. Now Warren executing his next step. Forging my signature, increasing my policy, booking the same resort. He didn't marry me and then decide to kill me, I said. He decided to kill me and then married me to set it up. Clarice nodded slowly. The timeline supports it. You were building an empire 13 years ago. 3 restaurants, national press, James Beard nominations. You were visible, successful, and wealthy. Perfect target. He researched me, I said. The words felt like stones in my mouth. Selected me. Approached me at that gala. Courted me. Married me. Spent 13 years positioning himself. Practiced his method on Victor while I thought we were building a life together. And now he's ready to execute the plan he started before your first date. Clarice finished. Garrett sat back in his chair looking ill. I helped with Victor's paperwork. I filed documents that were part of a 13-year murder plan, and I didn't know. None of us knew, I said. But that wasn't quite true. Harriet had known. She'd spent 3 years trying to make someone listen. I looked at the email again. Next step. 2 words written 4 years ago. 2 words that meant me. Every anniversary we'd celebrated. Every vacation we'd taken. Every morning coffee, every goodnight. Kiss, every I love you. Whispered in the dark. All of it calculated performance. Leading to one ending. My death. His profit. His next victim after that. How many others? I asked quietly. Before Victor. Before me. How many other women did Warren research and marry and plan to kill? Curtis is looking into that now, Clarice said. But based on the timeline, Victor appears to be the first full execution. You're the second. Second and last, I thought. Because this pattern was ending with me just not the way Warren planned. I read those 2 words over and over, next step. Understood then, truly understood that I wasn't a woman Warren grew to love and later decided to exploit. I was a target he selected, researched and married 13 years ago for one purpose, to kill me and take everything I'd built. The only question left was whether he'd realize I knew before December. He wouldn't realize I knew because I was better at performing than he'd ever been. The proof came Monday morning when Curtis showed me exactly how Warren had staged our first meeting. The canceled check Curtis slid across his desk was dated 13 years ago, $15,000 paid to a business consultant 2 weeks before the charity gala, where my husband accidentally met me. Monday morning, early November. Curtis's office smelled like rain and old files, the window behind him streaked with water that blurred Midtown into abstract shapes. Harriet sat beside me, her presence steady and silent. Curtis had called us both in for what he termed the final historical piece. The check was made out to Simon Caldwell. Business Development Research, the memo line read. Simon Caldwell was on the charity gala guest list, Curtis said. Old business associate of Warren's. I found him retired in Connecticut. For $500, he told me everything. Curtis opened a file. Inside were notes from his conversation with Caldwell, photocopies of tax records showing the consulting fee, and a timeline that made my stomach turn. Warren paid Caldwell $15,000 to profile you, Curtis said. Rising young female entrepreneur in food and beverage sector. Assets accelerating rapidly. Age 41, recently divorced, building a catering empire. Caldwell provided Warren with everything: your business metrics, your social circles, which events you'd be attending. Warren researched you, planned his approach, and staged a chance meeting. Harriet's hand found mine across the armrest. Her grip was firm. He paid someone to tell him who I was, I said slowly, so he could pretend to meet me by accident. Yes. Curtis's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. The conversation at the bar about overpriced wine scripted. He knew you'd just launched your first standalone restaurant. He knew about the divorce. He knew your business was accelerating. You weren't a woman he happened to meet and fall in love with. You were a target he selected, researched, and approached with precision. In 13 years, was there a single moment that was real? A single kiss? A single word? A single morning when he looked at me and saw a wife instead of a target? I didn't have an answer. I suspected there wasn't one. Tuesday afternoon, Clarice's office. Secure conference room with soundproof walls and a view of Manhattan that I barely registered. Harriet had arranged this meeting through FBI channels she'd been working for months. Victor's case had an active federal investigator since she'd submitted her files in August. FBI Special Agent Karen Walsh walked in first, mid-40s, dark suit, silver pen clipped to her jacket pocket, and the bearing of someone who'd spent 20 years turning circumstantial evidence into convictions. Her partner, Special Agent David Torres, followed with a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain evidence from a dozen cases. Mrs. Fletcher, Walsh said, extending her hand. I've been working Victor Sinclair's case for 3 months. Harriet's documentation has been invaluable, but we've hit a wall. We sat. Torres opened his briefcase and began pulling out files. Victor's case summary, the evidence Harriet had collected, Curtis's investigation reports. The circumstantial evidence on Victor's death is substantial but insufficient for federal indictment, Walsh explained. Suspicious, absolutely. Prosecutable, not yet. We need direct evidence of intent, premeditation, conspiracy. We need them to confess or act on camera. Your case gives us that opportunity, Torres added. The conspiracy against you is happening now in real time. We can document it. We can catch them in the act. Walsh leaned forward. But we need your cooperation. This isn't witness protection. This is active federal operation. You'd be working with us. What do you need? I asked. Walsh outlined the operational plan. I would accept Warren's Catskills trip as scheduled. FBI would provide covert protection at the resort, unmarked vehicles agents, posing as guests, and staff 24-hour surveillance. But they couldn't arrest based on plans alone. They needed action plus verbal admission. We're proposing a wired confrontation, Walsh said. Get them to admit the conspiracy on federal recording. That requires a Title III warrant, court-authorized wiretap. Based on the probable cause we've already documented, I can secure it. She paused. But Mrs. Fletcher, you'd be the center of that confrontation. You'd be bait. I wasn't asking the FBI for protection. I was offering them my restaurant as the stage for Warren's final performance. The trap night happens at my restaurant, I said. Altitude, 42nd floor. I know that terrain better than anyone in this room. I know the layout, the security, the staff. If you're going to wire a confrontation, it happens where I control the environment. Walsh studied my face. Torres glanced at his partner, something unspoken passing between them. Mrs. Fletcher. Walsh said carefully, "Are you certain you want to do this? A wired confrontation means you'll be in the same room with people who've been planning your murder. The psychological pressure. Agent Walsh." I interrupted. "I've run 3 major restaurants for 15 years. I know how to prepare for an important evening. I know how to manage difficult guests. I know how to execute a service when the stakes are high." I met her eyes. "This is just another service, except the guests don't know they're being served." The conference room was silent for a beat. Then Walsh smiled. It was small, brief, but genuine. The smile of someone recognizing an equal, not a victim needing protection. "Altitude restaurant," she said. "We'll need floor plans, security protocols, staff roster. Title III warrant takes time court approval, federal judge signature. But based on what we have, I can expedite it." "How long?" Clarice asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We'll coordinate with your timeline to the Catskills. The trap night happens after you return, gives us time to stage everything properly." Torres pulled out a legal pad. "We'll need to install recording equipment at the restaurant. Hidden cameras, directional microphones. Your participation would include wearing a wire during the confrontation." "Done," I said. Walsh looked at me across the conference table, her expression shifting from concern to something like respect. "Are you certain?" she asked one final time. I didn't blink. "I've run 3 restaurants for 15 years, Agent Walsh. I know how to prepare for an important evening." She smiled for the first time since walking into the room. Recognition passed between us, woman to woman, professional to professional. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an architect designing the trap that would catch my husband. The trap was authorized, and I was no longer the bait. I was the one setting the table. Setting the table began with the performance of my life. I said yes to the Catskills trip with a smile I'd practiced 17 times in the bathroom mirror. Late October, Wednesday evening. Warren had made dinner, or rather ordered dinner from the Italian place on Columbus, and arranged it on our good plates like he'd cooked it himself. Candlelight. Wine. The choreography of a husband trying to reconnect with his wife. Except I knew Agent Walsh was listening through the wire I'd agreed to wear starting that week, and Warren had no idea his concerned husband routine was being recorded for federal evidence. "I know I've been distant," Warren said, refilling my wine glass. "Work has been overwhelming, but I want to make it up to you." "I appreciate that," I said, my voice warm. "So I booked something special. A week at Hemlock Ridge Resort in the Catskills. First week of December. You'll go alone. Real solitude. Real rest. No staff emergencies, no vendor calls. Just you and the mountains." I let appropriate hesitation show on my face. "Warren, I can't just leave the restaurants for a week. Dominic can handle it. You've trained him for exactly this kind of situation." Warren reached across the table, took my hand. "Please, let me do this for you. You've been working yourself to exhaustion." I looked at him, saw triumph flicker beneath the concern. He thought he'd won. Thought his psychological strategy had finally broken through my resistance. I smiled. "You're right. I do need the break. Thank you." Warren's entire face lit up. "Really? Really?" That night, lying in bed after Warren had fallen asleep, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Agent Walsh, listening to that conversation through the wire. Thought about the recording being transcribed, filed, added to the evidence folders that kept growing thicker. Warren's breathing was deep and steady beside me. The bourbon he'd had after dinner guaranteed he'd sleep soundly. I'd said yes, the trap was set, and Warren believed he'd won. First week of December. The drive to the Catskills took 3 hours through early winter landscape, stripped bare of leaves. Hemlock Ridge Resort sat at the end of a winding mountain road, a collection of luxury cabins, perched on a ridge, overlooking valleys that stretched for miles. The Catskills resort brochure Warren left on my nightstand, glossy photos of autumn foliage deck chairs overlooking valleys, testimonials about healing getaways. The edge of one page had his thumbprint in what looked like coffee. I checked into cabin 7 as instructed. The receptionist was cheerful, professional, gave me a key card and directions. The cabin was beautiful exposed wood beams, stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the valley, and a deck. I walked out onto it carefully. The view was stunning. Mountains layered into the distance, December sky pale and cold above them. The railing felt solid under my hands. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned. A man in groundskeeper coveralls stood at the edge of the deck, rake in hand. Mid-50s, weathered face, the kind of person you'd see at any mountain resort and never look at twice. "I'm Mike," he said. "Maintenance. If you need anything, just call the front desk." "Thank you," I said. He nodded and walked away. But I'd seen the nearly invisible earpiece, seen the way his eyes had scanned the cabin's exterior with professional precision. Mike wasn't maintenance. Mike was FBI. I spent that first day reading on the deck, taking walks on marked trails, eating dinner in the resort restaurant, playing the role of a woman on a restorative solo retreat. But I was watching, and I knew others were watching too. Tyler Brennan appeared the first time around 4 p.m. I was inside the cabin when I saw him through the window, young man in maintenance coveralls, tool bag over his shoulder, walking past cabin 7 with the casual stride of someone who belonged there. But he slowed near my deck, glanced at the railing, kept walking. Second time was 9 p.m. I turned off most of the lights, made it look like I was in the bedroom, watched through a crack in the curtains as Tyler approached the deck again. This time he stopped, pulled something from his tool bag I couldn't see clearly in the darkness, but it looked like a wrench or socket set. He knelt near the base of the railing, stayed there 3 minutes, working on something, then froze, head turning. Someone was approaching. He stood quickly, shoved the tool back in his bag, and walked away. I didn't move from the window, just watched, waited. Third time was 2 a.m. I was still awake, hadn't been able to sleep, knowing Tyler was out there somewhere. Heard footsteps on the deck. Careful, quiet. Saw his shape through the window, illuminated slightly by the security lights along the path. He was back at the railing, working faster this time. Then another sound, footsteps approaching. Mike's voice, "Evening. You need something." Tyler straightened. "Just checking the hardware. Had a report of loose bolts." At 2 a.m., maintenance schedule. Tyler's voice was tight. "You have a problem with that?" "No problem, just making my rounds." Tyler gathered his tools and left. Mike stayed on the deck another moment, examining whatever Tyler had been working on, then disappeared into the darkness. My phone rang at 11 p.m. the next night. Agent Walsh. "Mrs. Fletcher, we have what we need. Tyler Brennan was caught on surveillance cameras 3 times in 24 hours, tampering with your cabin's deck railing. We have clear video of him using specific tools, removing hardware-weakening structural supports. Material proof of attempted murder. What do I do? Check out immediately. Tell the front desk you have a restaurant emergency back in the city. We'll handle everything else." I packed in 10 minutes. Driving away from Hemlock Ridge at midnight, emergency checkout complete. I thought about Victor Sinclair 3 years ago. He'd come to this same resort, stood on a deck like mine, looked at these same mountains. He'd had no FBI surveillance, no Agent Walsh calling with warnings, no one watching the shadows, just Warren's promises and whatever Tyler or someone like him had done to that railing, and a fall that killed him. Agent Walsh's voice came through my car's Bluetooth as I merged onto the thruway heading south. "We have everything we need from the resort," she said. "Now we set the final trap, but this one happens in New York City, and you'll be in the same room with all of them." Victor's death certificate was folded in my purse, a reminder of why this mattered. That room in New York City would be Altitude's Diamond Suite, and preparing it began with answering an impossible question. What do you do when the man who tried to kill you tells you his mistress is carrying a child that might not be his? Wednesday, late November. Clarice's conference room, Garrett, Curtis, Clarice, and me. "Celeste is pregnant," Garrett said without preamble. 12, maybe 13 weeks. She told Warren the child is his. The room went silent. "But I was sleeping with Celeste during that same window," Garrett continued. "The timing overlaps. I don't know whose child it is. Neither does she, and Warren has no idea there's any question." Curtis leaned forward. That's why she refused the wine at Le Bernardin. I thought she looked pale. The burgundy, I said, remembering the surveillance photos. I looked at Garrett, saw the guilt written across his face. A young attorney who'd gotten involved with a woman he didn't know was a serial killer. The child did nothing wrong, I said. Whatever happens to Celeste and Warren, that child is innocent. But this changes nothing about what they did to Victor. We proceed exactly as planned. Clarice made a note. The pregnancy complicates prosecution, but doesn't change the charges. If anything, it adds psychological pressure on Warren. Victor never knew there was a child coming when they killed him. He never knew anything was wrong until the moment he fell. Thursday and Friday, late November. Altitude's diamond suite, glass-walled private room on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Seated 12, intimate enough for conversation, large enough for our trap. Agent Walsh supervised FBI technicians installing surveillance equipment. Court-authorized wiretap under Title III warrant probable cause documented through Victor's diaries, recovered emails, Tyler's Hemlock Ridge actions. 2 recording systems, Walsh explained. Federal wire under warrant and your restaurant security cameras under New York one-party consent law. Redundancy matters in court. I watched them install tiny cameras and crown-molding microphones hidden in floral arrangements. The equipment was invisible professional. Dominic stood beside me reviewing the menu. My executive chef and co-owner, precise and meticulous. The 2019 Chateauneuf-du-Pape, he said. Same vintage Celeste drank at Victor Sinclair's wedding 3 years ago. Are you certain? I'm certain, I said. Every detail matters. She drank that wine while planning Victor's murder. She'll drink it again while confessing to mine. I've been certain since Francine called you in January, Dominic said quietly. The preparation took 2 days. Every angle checked, every camera tested, every microphone calibrated. Walsh ran 3 full system checks before she was satisfied. By Friday evening, the Diamond Suite was ready. It looked elegant. It was actually a federal surveillance operation disguised as dinner. Before I tell you what happened when Warren received that legal notice, if you're still with me, comment A, if you think he'll realize it's a trap, or B, if you think panic will blind him. Add 1 short reason, why. Please note, some details ahead are dramatized to convey the emotional weight. If that's not for you, feel free to pause here. Monday, late November. I was at altitude reviewing final details when Garrett called. It just happened, Garrett said. Legal courier delivered 15 minutes ago. Preliminary injunction freezing all Delaware LLC assets. Right of first refusal notice on his altitude shares. Everything. How did he react? He's on the phone with Celeste now. I can hear him from my office. He's losing it. I heard Warren's voice in the background, muffled but audible. Loud. Agitated. 20 minutes now, Garrett reported. He's pacing. I've never seen him like this. Then he hung up with Celeste, making another call. Wait, he just said it. We need to push it up. This week, I can't wait until December. Push it up, I repeated. 2 words that meant Warren had lost control. He's panicking, Garrett said. Wants to accelerate everything. The legal freeze, he knows he's losing his escape route. I looked out Altitude's windows at Manhattan below. 42 floors down, Warren was making panicked calls trying to salvage a plan that had been falling apart since January. Good, I said. Panicked people make mistakes. They get sloppy. They say things they shouldn't. I engineered this exact pressure for exactly that outcome. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Let him panic. Let him call Celeste 10 more times. Let him think accelerating will save him. I paused. The trap is set. He just doesn't know he's walking into it. I listened to Garrett repeat Warren's words, voice tight with panic, timeline collapsing, control slipping. I knew what panic does to careful men. It strips away the calculated performance. It forces them to show their true selves. And when Warren showed his true self in my wired diamond suite with FBI cameras recording every word, it would be over. The trap was set. The date would be confirmed within days. Warren had no idea he was about to walk into a room wired by federal agents, sit across from his wife, and confess to everything while the government recorded it all. Garrett, I said, document everything, every call, every panic, every word. It's all evidence now. Already doing it. I hung up and stared at Manhattan stretching beneath me. On the 42nd floor of this building, a woman had just engineered her husband's arrest by giving him exactly what he thought he wanted: pressure, panic, and a reason to accelerate straight into a federal trap. Warren was walking into a room wired by the FBI, and he had absolutely no idea. Warren walked into that wired room Friday night. But 3 days before I watched my husband enter a federal trap, his victim's mother read me a letter her dead son had written about Saturday pancakes. Tuesday, December 2nd. Harriet's house in Queens, the same modest brick home where I'd first learned Victor's story months ago. This time she'd asked me to come alone. No Curtis, no Clarice, no one else. Just the two of us in her living room that smelled like lavender and old paper. Harriet held a yellowed envelope with careful hands. "My son left this in his favorite book," she said. "I found it 2 months after he passed. Never read it aloud to anyone except myself, alone in the dark." She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, Victor's neat script filling 2 pages of lined notebook paper. Harriet began reading. "Mom, if you're reading this, something happened and I didn't get the chance to change things in time. I want you to know I'm sorry. You warned me about Celeste from the beginning. You said something felt wrong when I first introduced her. You told me to wait to be careful to watch for the signs you saw that I didn't. I should have listened." Harriet's voice was steady, practiced. She'd read this letter to herself 100 times. "I remember Saturday pancakes when I was 8 years old. You let me flip them myself even though I made a mess. I remember the bicycle you saved for 6 months to buy me blue with white handlebars. I remember every time you protected me from something I was too young or too naive to see coming. And now when I needed that protection most, I ignored you." She paused, folded the letter, carefully looked at me. "He wrote that he should have listened to me about Celeste from the beginning, that he saw the truth too late." Her hands trembled slightly. "My son knew he was in danger. He tried to tell me without telling me, and I couldn't save him." "You couldn't have known," I said quietly. "But I did know. I felt it. Mothers know." Harriet refolded the letter, placed it back in the envelope. "I don't want another mother to read lines like these. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'll be in that room Friday night." I said nothing. No words were adequate. Victor wrote about Saturday pancakes. Warren probably doesn't remember what he ate the morning Victor died. Friday, December 5th, 6:00 p.m. Altitude's 42nd floor, the Diamond Suite, prepared like a stage set for the performance of Warren's life. I stood in the corridor while the final diagnostic ran. Dominic's voice came through my earpiece. "Kitchen ready, menu confirmed. The 2019 Chateauneuf is breathing. Surveillance active." Curtis reported from his position at the rear fire exit. "Fire exit secured. I have visual on lobby entrance." Agent Walsh's voice. "Monitoring closet operational. Audio equipment at 100%. All channels clear." 2 FBI technicians in the service corridor confirmed their positions with hand signals through the glass. I walked into the Diamond Suite. The glass-walled room overlooked Manhattan's evening skyline lights beginning to glow as dusk settled. The table was set for 4 elegant, intimate, the kind of dinner that looked like reconciliation. Harriet sat at the table, already wearing a black dress and pearls. Her white hair was coiffed elegantly. She looked like any other well-heeled patron dining at Manhattan's finest restaurants. "Are you ready?" I asked. Harriet's hand rested flat on the white tablecloth, the hand that had trembled for 3 years ever since police called to tell her Victor was dead. It was perfectly steady. "I've been ready since the day my son died," she said. "Let's finish this." I took the seat opposite her. Through the windows, Manhattan stretched out below us, millions of people living their lives, unaware that on this floor in this room, justice was about to be served cold. We waited. 6:15, 6:30, 6:45. At 7:00, Agent Walsh's voice. "Update targets confirmed en route. Estimated arrival 7:40. At 7:30, targets 15 minutes out." Harriet and I sat in silence. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered would be said in the next hour, and none of it would be between us. 7:45 p.m. My phone vibrated against the table. Text from Curtis. Their vehicle just pulled up. 2 targets. ETA 5 minutes. 2 targets. ETA 5 minutes. 3 years collapsed into 300 seconds. I looked at Harriet across the table. She nodded once. Her hand was steady. Her face was calm. She'd waited 3 years for this moment, 3 years of being told she was a grieving mother who couldn't accept an accident, 3 years of investigation folders covering her living room, 3 years of knowing the truth, while everyone else called her delusional. Agent Walsh's voice through my earpiece. Audio live, all channels recording. You're clear to proceed. 5 minutes. After 3 years of Harriet's investigation, after 6 months of my investigation, after Victor's death and Warren's 14-year plan and Celeste's pattern of murder, after forged signatures and insurance fraud and a young man tampering with a deck railing in the middle of the night, 5 minutes until Warren and Celeste walked through that door, 5 minutes until they saw me sitting at a table with Victor's mother, 5 minutes until they realized the reconciliation dinner Warren thought he was attending was actually a federal trap. My phone vibrated again. Curtis elevator ascending, ETA 2 minutes. Harriet's eyes met mine. We both understood what was about to happen. The years of planning, the months of evidence gathering, the weeks of legal preparation, all converging in the next 2 minutes. They're coming, I said quietly. Harriet nodded once, hands steady, eyes clear. Warren and Celeste were walking into a room where Victor's mother was waiting, and they had absolutely no idea. They had no idea. The roses hit the floor first, 12 red stems scattering across dark wood before Warren's brain processed who was sitting at the table. 7:50 p.m. The diamond suite door swung open. Warren stepped through, first carrying a bouquet of deep crimson roses, his hand resting on Celeste's back in that proprietary way I'd seen in the wedding video 4 years ago. He was talking, not looking at the room yet. I booked this room absolute best view in Manhattan. You're going to love... He looked up, saw me, saw Harriet. The roses slipped from his fingers. Petals scattered across the dark wood floor like drops of blood stems, clattering in the sudden silence. Celeste's gaze followed his, landed on Harriet Sinclair sitting across from me, elegant in black-white hair, perfectly coiffed hands, folded on the white tablecloth. Celeste's face drained of color in a fraction of a second. She tried to mask it, years of performance snapping into place, but her eyes couldn't conceal the recognition. The panic. Harriet looked at Celeste, said nothing, just looked. 3 years of patient waiting condensed into that single gaze. What is she doing here? Celeste's voice came out tight, strangled. Warren, what is this? I didn't stand, didn't greet them. Just sat in my chair and spoke in the same tone I'd used to explain a menu pairing. Sit down, we have an extraordinary amount to discuss. Warren stood frozen in the doorway. His M&A attorney brain was processing, calculating, trying to understand how a reconciliation dinner had transformed into something else entirely. Something that smelled like a trap. Lorraine, he started. I don't understand. Sit, I repeated, not louder, just colder. They sat. Warren in the chair to my right, Celeste to his right. Across the table from Harriet, who still hadn't spoken a word. I reached beneath my chair and pulled out the first folder, set it on the table between us. We'll start with finances, I said. Opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, transaction records, highlighted in yellow. 11 charges over 8 months. Hotels, restaurants, a designer bag. The evidence Curtis had pulled from our joint account. 11 transactions. I said, my voice clinical. 8 months. Would you like me to read the memo lines, or shall we skip ahead? Warren's jaw set. Granite. The lawyer mask sliding into place. I pulled out the second folder. Celeste's Instagram printed on glossy paper. The Balmain bag. The caption about unexpected gifts. Friday, October 18th. I read, unexpected gifts make the best Fridays. The same day, $8,500 was charged to our joint account. Celeste's hands clenched in her lap. Third folder, wedding video still frames printed in sequence. Minute 47. Warren's hand passing the envelope. Celeste accepting it behind the decorative flats while Victor laughed with his groomsmen 20 feet away. Victor's wedding, I said. 4 years ago, my catering company filmed this. You didn't know we archived everything, did you? Celeste stared at the images, then looked at Harriet. Her performance smile, the one that had probably fooled dozens of people, vanished completely. The folders were gravestones, each one marking what Warren thought he'd buried forever. Fourth folder, life insurance documents. The policy Warren had increased. The signature that wasn't mine. $4.5 million. I said, my signature, except I never signed it. Federal insurance fraud. Title 18 United States Code, Section 1033, 10 to 15 years. Fifth folder, Delaware LLC records. Asset transfers, the fraudulent debt tied to my name. $2.3 million in debt you created in my name, I said, to be inherited by my estate when I died, which I was supposed to do in December at Hemlock Ridge Resort, the same place Victor died 3 years ago. Harriet's hand rested flat on the table through all of this, completely steady. 3 years of trembling had stopped the moment her son's killers saw the evidence. I spread all 5 folders across the table, a timeline of conspiracy laid out in manila and paper. Warren stared at the evidence. His lawyer brain was working. I could see it in his eyes, calculating defenses, weighing options, looking for exits. Celeste just looked pale. 30 minutes. That's how long I let the evidence sit there between us while Manhattan glittered 42 floors below. 30 minutes of silence broken only by the ventilation system's low hum and the distant sound of kitchen activity. Finally, Warren found his voice. Lorraine. He reached toward me across the table. Please, let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at him with the same cold assessment I'd use evaluating a supplier who'd tried to cheat me. You can leave now or sit and listen to the end, I said. But if you think there's still a chance for forgiveness, you don't know who I am at all. Warren's hand stopped mid-reach, drew back. That video was private. Celeste said, her voice rising with an edge of panic. You had no right. Victor's mother has every right to see who was sleeping with his wife the day he died, I said. Harriet, would you like to see the rest of the footage? There are several other moments worth reviewing. Harriet spoke for the first time since Warren and Celeste had entered. No, she said quietly. I've seen enough. Her voice was steady, calm. The voice of a woman who'd spent 3 years being called delusional and had finally been proven right. Celeste looked at the door. I saw the calculation in her eyes. Escape, flight, the instinct to run. Warren looked at the evidence folders, saw his career, his freedom, his carefully constructed plan scattered across the table, like those rose petals on the floor. I want to leave, Celeste said, standing. Warren, we should leave right now. Warren looked at me, then at Harriet, then at the door. I waited. Leaving would be admission. Staying would be exposure. Either choice was a confession. Warren's hand found Celeste's wrist, pulled her back down into her chair. Well, listen, he said. They were going to stay and hear every word. What they didn't know, what neither of them had realized from the moment they walked through that door, was that every word they'd said, every panicked glance, every attempt at defense had been recorded by federal equipment hidden in the crown molding and the floral arrangements. The FBI was hearing everything. The FBI had been hearing everything. And now Harriet Sinclair spoke for the first time all night, her voice calm to an unsettling degree. Celeste, Harriet said. Celeste's head snapped toward her. The older woman sitting across the table, Victor's mother, the one she'd probably dismissed as collateral damage years ago. You stood at my son's funeral. Harriet continued, each word measured and deliberate. You wore black. You cried on cue, and you told me Victor truly loved me. You held my hand while I wept. I believed you. She paused. That was the single worst mistake I ever made, believing you. Harriet reached into the leather bag beside her chair, pulled out items one by one, placing them on the table like evidence at trial. Victor's journals, an audio recording device in a plastic evidence bag, email printouts. This entire dossier was handed to FBI in August, Harriet said. Tonight isn't for me to confront you. Tonight is for FBI to listen to you. Celeste's eyes went wide, darted to the ceiling, to the floral arrangement in the center of the table, to the crown molding, seeing what she should have seen the moment she walked in: cameras, microphones, federal surveillance. No, Celeste breathed. She stood abruptly, chair scraping. No, this is Warren. We need to leave. Now. She bolted for the door. It opened before she reached it. Curtis Hayes stood in the doorway, blocking her exit. Mid-40s, the weathered face of someone who'd spent years documenting other people's secrets. "I'm Curtis Hayes," he said calmly. "Mrs. Sinclair hired me 2 years ago. I've cataloged every day of your life since." Celeste backed away from the door. Trapped. The diamond suite suddenly revealed as what it truly was: a box with glass walls and no exit. Warren's lawyer instincts kicked in. He stood hands raised in that placating gesture I'd seen him use in negotiations. "This is entrapment," he said. "Whatever you think you've recorded tonight is inadmissible. I had zero knowledge of Catskill's operational plans. That was entirely Celeste and whoever else she—" The door opened again. Garrett Thornton walked in carrying his laptop. Warren's face drained of color, went ash gray. "Garrett," Warren's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Garrett set the laptop on the table, opened it so the screen faced Warren, pulled up an email that glowed in the dim light of the diamond suite. "I came to return a lesson you taught me on my first day," Garrett said. The email was dated 4 years ago. Subject line framework confirmed. The body text was brief. "V. Victor signed new insurance framework policy value noted timeline as discussed next step mentioned." Signed with a single letter, R. But below the signature was the metadata display Garrett had pulled. Timestamp. Originating server IP address from Morrison and Hale's executive suite. Warren's verified digital signature, the kind that couldn't be faked, couldn't be disputed, the immutable fingerprint of authorship. Digital signatures don't lie. Warren taught Garrett that. Garrett remembered. "You told me first day." Garrett said, his voice steady, "that a premier attorney never deletes email. You never know when you'll need it to bury someone." He looked Warren in the eye. "I learned that lesson very well." Warren stared at the screen. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at the metadata, at the digital signature, at the evidence of his own words from 4 years ago. The arrogance collapsed. The lawyer mask crumbled. He sank back into his chair. The door opened fully. Agent Walsh stepped into the diamond suite, 3 other FBI agents behind her. They'd been in the service corridor the entire time, listening through headphones, waiting for my signal. Walsh looked at me. I gave her a single nod. She turned to Warren. "Warren Fletcher." Walsh said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and insurance fraud." 2 agents moved forward. Handcuffs clicked around Warren's wrists. He didn't resist, just stared at the table, at the evidence folders, at the life he'd built crumbling in real time. "Celeste Brennan." Walsh continued. "You're also under arrest." Celeste's handcuffs went on next. She was crying now, real tears, not performance. The kind of crying that comes when you realize there's no exit, no performance good enough to escape federal prosecution. They were led out. Warren first, then Celeste. Past Curtis in the doorway, past Harriet, who watched them go with the calm of someone who'd waited 3 years for this moment. Agent Walsh paused at the door. "Tyler Brennan was arrested 15 minutes ago at Hemlock Ridge Resort. Coordinated sweep. We have all 3. Then she was gone and the diamond suite was silent. Harriet, Dominic, Curtis, and I sat in the aftermath. Manhattan glittered below us, oblivious to what had just happened on the 42nd floor. I reached into my bag, pulled out the final folder Clarice had prepared. Divorce papers, every page flagged with yellow tabs marking where I needed to sign. I signed them all. The pen scratches were distinct in the quiet room. No tears, no final words. Just my signature closing each chapter cleanly, 1 page at a time. When I finished, I set the pen down. It was done. The marriage, the conspiracy, The 13-year lie, all of it ended with ink on paper. Dominic appeared from the kitchen carrying a wine glass and a bottle. The label was familiar, 2019 Chateauneuf du Pape, the same vintage from the wedding video, the wine Celeste had drunk while planning Victor's murder. He poured carefully, set the glass before me. "You earned this," Dominic said quietly. "Victor would want you to have this moment." The wine was the same vintage Celeste drank at Victor's wedding. I'd waited 3 years to taste it. I looked at the glass, at Harriet sitting across from me, her hands finally still after 3 years of trembling, at the signed divorce papers, at the empty chairs where Warren and Celeste had sat minutes ago, felt the weight of 3 years of investigation of performance of building a trap while maintaining perfect composure finally lift. For the first time since Francine's call in January, I smiled. The silence after revenge is louder than you'd think. No sirens, no celebration, just Clarice's voice on speakerphone listing the wreckage I'd engineered. For the first time since Francine's call in January, I smiled. Then the smile faded as Clarice began her update. "Warren's being held without bail," she said, her tone measured professional. The email evidence combined with Garrett's testimony and Tyler's actions at Hemlock Ridge, the judge ruled him both a flight risk and a potential danger. I stood at my penthouse window watching December snow dust the streets below. The word danger hung in the air. Warren, my husband of 26 years, a man who'd orchestrated murder and smiled at me across our breakfast table. Celeste was granted lower bail due to her clean record. Clarice continued, "But her passport's been seized. Tyler Brennan's in custody upstate. And Garrett—" She paused. "Garrett signed a formal cooperation agreement this morning. Full immunity from conspiracy charges in exchange for his testimony. The prosecutor determined he lacked knowledge of the murder intent, thought he was only facilitating the financial fraud." "And Victor's case?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. FBI officially reopened it yesterday. They're calling it homicide now, not an accidental fall. Forensics teams are back at Hemlock Ridge Resort. I pressed my palm against the cold window glass. Victor Sinclair dead at 38. The man whose widow Warren had married for access to his money, whose mother Harriet had trusted me with the truth. "Your Altitude ownership stake is being expedited through the divorce proceedings," Clarice said. "Warren's 30% is frozen by court order. It reverts to you. The fraudulent marital debt of $2.3 million declared legally null. You're not responsible for a penny of the money he and Celeste stole." I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt hollow. "Lorraine." Clarice's voice softened. "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen a dossier prepared this cleanly. You knew exactly what prosecutors would need. I'd spent 11 months building it. Curtis Hayes' surveillance photos, Tyler's maintenance logs, bank records showing the systematic theft, Garrett's emails exposing his unwitting role. Every piece carefully documented, cross-referenced, ready for Agent Walsh the moment Warren walked into that hotel suite. "Thank you, Clarice," I said. "I'll call you next week." But 2 days later, she called me instead. "Celeste Brennan requested a meeting," Clarice said. "With you specifically. She wants to discuss something. I advised against it, but she was quite insistent. Said it's not about her case." What do you do when your enemy asks you to protect the one innocent thing left in the wreckage? "Tell her I'll meet her," I said, but only with attorneys present, neutral location. The legal conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked Manhattan's December skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished mahogany table air that smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. Clarice sat to my right, Celeste's public defender to her left. Celeste arrived 10 minutes late. I barely recognized her. The woman who'd played perfect performance after perfect performance, polished fingernails, immaculate hair that cultivated warmth, that masked her calculations, was gone. In her place sat someone who looked like she'd been recovering from severe illness. No mascara. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. Her hands folded on the table showed bitten-down nails. She didn't offer an apology, didn't even attempt one. "I'm not here to apologize," she said, her voice flat. "I don't have energy for that performance anymore. I just need to ask one thing." She laid one hand over her stomach, a gesture I recognized, though the pregnancy wasn't yet visible through her loose sweater. "My child," she said, "can you keep us out of the press?" "Not for me, I don't deserve protection, but for the baby." I stared at her. "You're asking me to protect your child after you helped murder Victor." "Yes," Celeste said simply. "I know what I did. I know what's coming. But this child didn't choose any of this. And when the media gets hold of the story, pregnant woman on trial for her first husband's murder, while married to her co-conspirator, they'll tear us apart. That child will grow up with those headlines following them forever." Clarice shifted beside me. Celeste's lawyer said nothing. I thought of Victor's letter to Harriet, the one Harriet had shown me last January. Victor wrote about protection, about making sure Celeste didn't get away with stealing his insurance money. He'd sensed something wrong in those final weeks, but couldn't identify the danger, couldn't protect himself. "You're asking me for mercy," I said. Celeste shook her head. "I'm asking you to protect someone who can't protect themselves, someone innocent, that's all." I looked at her for a long moment, at the exhaustion in her face, the defeat in her posture. She wasn't performing anymore. No charm, no manipulation. Just a woman who destroyed her own life asking me not to destroy her child's. Victor wrote, "Don't let her get the insurance money." I honored that, but protecting her child. That's different justice entirely. "I will not leak anything to the media," I said finally. "Not because you deserve protection, you don't, but because that child does not deserve to be dragged into the wreckage adults created." Celeste's shoulders sagged. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. She left without another word. I sat alone after she'd gone looking out at December Manhattan. Snow falling against glass, the city glittering in afternoon light. I thought of Victor's letter to Harriet. "If I die, don't let her get the insurance money." He couldn't protect himself from what was coming, but I could protect this child even if it wasn't the way he'd envisioned. Different kind of justice. Harriet Sinclair had been called a grieving, unhinged mother for 3 years until Agent Walsh knocked on her door and said 2 words, "You're right." That mercy I'd shown Celeste protecting an innocent child from the wreckage had cost me nothing. But sitting in Harriet's Queen's living room the last week of December, watching Agent Walsh deliver vindication 3 years overdue, I understood what justice actually looked like. Agent Walsh stood in the center of Harriet's small living room, winter morning light, slanting through lace curtains. Curtis Hayes positioned himself by the window, silent as always watching the street. I sat beside Harriet on her worn floral sofa. "Mrs. Sinclair." Walsh said, "Based on the evidence we've collected, emails, audio recordings, your son's diaries, Garrett Hale's testimony, and forensic traces, Tyler Brennan left at Hemlock Ridge Resort. The district attorney is officially reopening your son's death investigation. The primary charge will be murder in the first degree. New York has no statute of limitations for murder." Harriet's hands trembled in her lap. She was 71 years old. 3 years she'd been fighting this battle. "Murder," she whispered. "They're calling it murder." "Yes, ma'am." Walsh left 10 minutes later. The door clicked shut. Harriet sank deeper into her armchair and broke down weeping. Not the grief tears I'd seen her cry before, but something different. Vindication tears. 3 years, she said through her sobs. 3 years they told me I was just a grieving mother who couldn't accept an accident, that I was making up conspiracies because I couldn't let go. But I was right. Victor knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. And I was right. I took her hand. It felt small and cold, bird bone, fragile. "You were always right, Harriet," I said quietly. Victor knew the truth in those final weeks. You knew the truth when they closed the case. Now everyone knows. Curtis turned from the window. "They dismissed you because it was easier than investigating," he said, his voice hard. "Easier to call you crazy than admit they'd missed a murder." Harriet wiped her eyes with a tissue, then looked at me. "You kept your promise. That day at the charity gala when I handed you Victor's letter, you said you'd find the truth. And you did." I stayed another hour, made her tea. sat in comfortable silence while she processed what vindication felt like after years of being gaslit by investigators who decided her son's death was accidental and her maternal instinct was delusion. Driving home, I pulled over halfway through Queens, just stopped the car on a residential street, put it in park, and looked up. Snow was falling, soft as feathers coating my windshield in white silence. I sat alone in that stopped car and spoke to someone who couldn't hear me. Victor. I said aloud to my empty car, "I hope you hear this wherever you are. Your mother was right. You didn't die in vain. They're calling it murder now. Everyone will know what happened to you." The snow kept falling. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A woman walked past with grocery bags, glanced at my idling car, kept walking. I kept my promise. I continued. The one I made when Francine called me in January, when I realized the husband I'd trusted for 26 years had helped murder a man I'd never met. I promised myself I'd find the truth, and I did. Victor died in November. Harriet learned the truth in December. Took 3 years for anyone official to say murder. I sat there 5 minutes watching snow accumulate on my windshield, coating the glass until I could barely see through it. Finally, I turned on the wipers, put the car in drive, and continued toward Manhattan. 2 days later, December 28th, I stood in my Upper West Side penthouse surrounded by cardboard boxes. The space looked naked, stripped bare. Winter sunlight poured through uncurtained windows, illuminating dust motes and carpet indentations where furniture used to stand. I'd packed everything: clothes, books, a few framed photos. The kitchen cabinets stood empty. The closets gaped open. Clarice had been clear the penthouse was mine through the divorce settlement. I had every legal right to stay. But staying would mean living in the prison I'd shared with my warden for 26 years. Every room held Warren's ghost, not the murdered dead, but something worse, the ghost of my own blindness. I opened an old desk drawer, found the business card I'd handed Harriet at that charity event 2 years ago, back when I was still just Warren's wife, unaware of the murder connecting us. I placed the card in my coat pocket. Dominic Reyes arrived at 2 o'clock to help load boxes into a rental van. "You sure about this, boss?" he asked, hefting a box labeled kitchen. "Legally, this place is yours. You won the penthouse. Why leave?" I taped up the final box. Winning would have been keeping my marriage while he rotted in prison for what he did to someone else. I said, This is just real estate." We loaded the van in silence. 18 boxes. 26 years reduced to 18 cardboard boxes. Walking out the final time, I didn't look back once. Dominic drove the van. I took a cab, watching Manhattan slide past the window. The driver merged onto the street, running alongside Central Park. The trees were completely bare. Winter had stripped them down to skeleton branches, black against pale December sky. No leaves, no buds, no visible evidence that spring would ever return. But spring always comes even when winter feels permanent. "You okay back there?" the cab driver asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "I'm better than I've ever been," I said, and meant it. The cab passed Central Park trees, completely bare winter, stripped down to skeleton branches. I thought about how spring always comes even when you can't see any evidence of it during the coldest months. Justice took 3 years. Healing might take longer, but spring always comes. I chose to live in Montauk, the same stretch of coast where Victor Sinclair fell to his death 3 years ago, because sometimes you have to reclaim the geography of your grief. Spring would come eventually, but first January. The key to my new cottage felt cold in my palm. Early January, wind off the Atlantic cut through my coat as I stood on the small wooden porch, looking at the weathered gray door. Behind me, waves crashed against coastal rocks with the relentless rhythm they'd maintained for millennia. I'd chosen this place deliberately. Not Brooklyn, not Queens, not anywhere in Manhattan's sprawl. This cottage sat directly on Long Island's eastern tip, windows facing the Atlantic, salt wind coming straight off the water. The same winter ocean Victor had looked at 3 years ago, not knowing what was coming. The realtor had warned me, "It's quite isolated, especially in winter. Are you sure you want to be out here alone?" I'd signed the lease that afternoon. The door opened with a creak that spoke of decades of sea wind warping the wood. Inside the cottage smelled like salt and old pine. One main room serving as kitchen and living space bedroom, barely large enough for a double bed bathroom with ancient fixtures. Windows everywhere facing the ocean, the rocks, the endless gray-blue expanse. I carried a single cardboard box inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stood at the largest window watching waves break white against dark stone. Victor stood somewhere near here 3 years ago, I said aloud to the empty cottage, looking at this same ocean, not knowing what Tyler Brennan was about to do. The waves didn't answer, they never do. I'm reclaiming this place, I continued. Not for you, for me. Because grief doesn't own geography forever. I unpacked the box slowly, coffee maker, single mug, French press bag of dark roast beans, basic kitchen supplies. A framed photo of Harriet and Victor from before he met Celeste. Harriet had given it to me the day Agent Walsh delivered vindication. The cottage had no television, no radio, just windows and ocean and the sound of water moving. I made coffee as the winter sun set early, turning the Atlantic from gray to black. First full morning in the cottage, I woke to the sound of waves and wind. No alarm, no schedule, no crisis demanding my immediate attention at 5:30 a.m. I made coffee in the French press, watching it steep, then poured it into my single mug and sat at the small kitchen table facing the ocean windows. The Atlantic in January looked slate gray and ferocious, white-capped waves breaking endlessly against rocks. Coastal winter, heavy with salt and cold. I sipped the coffee slowly. It was bitter and perfect like good espresso should be. For the first time in 13 years, I deliberately didn't check reservation metrics, didn't review catering schedules, didn't scan financial reports, didn't respond to vendor emails, just sat watching the ocean breathe. 13 years. Every single morning started with crisis management. Today started with coffee and silence. The restaurants had consumed me since I opened the first location. Every dawn meant numbers to analyze staff, to direct problems to solve. I'd built an empire on sacrifice, pouring myself into kitchens and dining rooms until there was nothing left for anyone else, not Warren, not myself, not the life I'd imagined having. But this morning, just coffee, just watching the ocean move with ancient patience. This is what freedom tastes like, I said to the empty cottage, bitter and perfect. A seagull landed on the porch railing outside, looked at me through the glass with one black eye, then flew away. I sat there until my coffee went cold. My phone buzzed against the kitchen table at 8:30. I looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. Old habits died hard for years. Every buzz meant emergency crisis disaster requiring immediate intervention. But the text from Dominic Reyes just said, all 3 locations opened normally this morning. Reservations tonight 100% across the board. You aren't needed here yet. I read the message twice. You aren't needed here yet. Not emergency in the kitchen. Not vendor canceled, need backup plan. Not health inspector arrived unannounced. Just you aren't needed. 5 words, permission to finally rest. I set the phone face down on the table and looked back out at the Atlantic. The restaurants I'd built through years of relentless work were thriving without my physical presence in the kitchen. 100% reservations across all 3 locations. Full dining rooms, staff executing perfectly. I'd trained them well enough that the empire ran without requiring my daily sacrifice to survive. I built something that doesn't need me to destroy myself, I said aloud. That's the real victory. Not revenge against Warren, not justice for Victor, not vindication for Harriet. This sitting in a cottage by the sea, drinking cold coffee, watching waves break against rocks, and knowing that the business I'd built with my own hands was functioning beautifully without me standing in its kitchen, bleeding myself dry to keep it alive. The restaurants would call when they needed me, but they didn't need me this morning, or yesterday morning, or probably tomorrow morning either. I'd spent 13 years becoming indispensable. Turned out the real skill was becoming unnecessary. The morning stretched ahead with nothing demanding my attention, no fires to extinguish, no crises to manage, no emergencies requiring the particular expertise only I could provide. Just ocean coffee and time that belonged entirely to me. I poured fresh coffee, warmed my hands on the mug, and watched the Atlantic keep moving with the same rhythm it had maintained long before humans invented restaurants or revenge or murder. Waves broke against rocks, wind moved across water, seagulls circled overhead crying to each other in their harsh voices. I set the phone face down on the table and looked back out at the Atlantic. Waves kept breaking against rocks with the same rhythm they'd had for millennia, indifferent to murder, indifferent to revenge, indifferent to justice. For the first time in 13 years, the morning belonged entirely to me. 6 weeks after watching my husband arrested for murder, Harriet Sinclair called to tell me she'd started painting watercolors. Her face appeared on my laptop screen video call from her Queen's kitchen. The background looked noticeably lighter. The towering stacks of Victor's investigation folders, the wall covered in timeline charts, the cardboard boxes of evidence all gone. The FBI secured additional physical evidence at Hemlock Ridge, she said. Forensic testing found chemical anomalies in the cabin's water filtration system. The prosecution case is rock solid. The DA's confident of full conviction. Good, I said, watching waves break outside my cottage window. And I started painting. A smile touched her face, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. Watercolors, terrible watercolors, but they're mine. She held up a piece of paper showing abstract blues and greens. It didn't matter what it depicted. What mattered was that Harriet Sinclair, who'd spent 3 years drowning in her son's murder investigation, was now painting. "How are you holding up out there in Montauk?" she asked. "I'm learning how to be fine," I said. That's the truest answer I have. We talked 20 more minutes, not about the trial, not about Warren or Celeste or Tyler. We talked about small essential things. Harriet taking watercolor classes at the community center, me growing fresh basil and rosemary in windowsill pots, things that grow back after storms. "Lorraine, thank you," she said before hanging up. Not just for finding the truth, but for believing me when I'd almost stopped believing myself. "You were right all along," I said. "I just helped prove it." After the call ended, I pulled on my coat and walked down to the beach. Late January on the Montauk shore meant light snow dusting, frozen sand Atlantic surf, pounding the coast with relentless winter force. The beach was deserted, just me, my travel mug of coffee, and miles of empty shoreline. I counted what I'd lost. 13 years of marriage. The person I thought I knew to his bones, all severed, cut away like diseased tissue. The ache was real. Loss hurts even when necessary, but scars prove you survived. Then I counted what remained. 3 restaurants operating at full capacity, not surviving, thriving. Clarice finalizing the divorce settlement, returning everything Warren had stolen. Harriet painting watercolors in Queens. Dominic drafting the spring menu without needing my approval. And me, learning how to begin each day serving myself first. Warren had targeted me deliberately. He chose me because of my value, the empire I'd built from nothing, the business acumen I'd honed through relentless work, the reputation I'd earned through decades of 18-hour days. He saw what I'd created and wanted to own it. But he forgot one fundamental thing. That value was never his. Not when we married. Not during 13 years together. Not ever. The restaurants I built them. The reputation I earned it. The success I achieved it. He thought marriage gave him access to what I'd created. Thought my value transferred through wedding vows. Value doesn't work that way. I reached the cottage, climbed the porch steps, turned back toward the Atlantic. Waves breaking white against dark rocks. Snow falling soft and clean. He chose me because of my value, but that value belonged to me. It always had. It always will. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 13 years building a life with someone I thought I knew. I poured everything into that marriage, into those restaurants, into being the person everyone could rely on. Looking back, I see now that I gave away my power by tying my worth to someone else's validation. Don't make my mistake. Your value doesn't come from anyone else, not your partner, not your success, not what you've built. It's already yours. There are countless revenge-cheating stories out there, but mine taught me something beyond the betrayal. When you discover the person you trusted most has been living a lie, you have a choice. You can let that betrayal define you, or you can reclaim who you were before them. I chose justice. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but accountability. These revenge-cheating stories we hear, they're not just about anger. They're about people finding their strength again. I believe God allowed me to uncover the truth when I was finally ready to handle it. The timing wasn't accidental. Neither is yours. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my position? Would you have chosen forgiveness or justice? Please consider subscribing to Her Vengeance for more stories of women who refuse to stay silent. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You might be giving them the courage they need. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note, some details in this story have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling purposes. What matters is the message that your worth was never theirs to take. God bless you.